Sophia Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she walked into the military training facility for the first time. The building looked massive and intimidating, with concrete walls and small windows that barely let any sunlight in. She carried her bag over her shoulder, trying to look confident even though her heart was beating fast. Today was the beginning of her journey to become a military sniper, something she had dreamed about for years. As she entered the main hall, dozens of eyes turned toward her. Most of the recruits were men, tall and muscular, looking like they had been training their whole lives. They whispered to each other and pointed at her. Sophia was only 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed barely 120 pounds. Compared to everyone else, she looked like she belonged in a library, not a military base. "Look what we have here," said Marcus, a big guy with arms like tree trunks. He walked over to Sophia with a smug smile on his face. "Are you lost, little girl? The cooking classes are in the other building." The other recruits laughed loudly. Sophia felt her face turn red, but she stood her ground. "I'm here for sniper training, just like you," she said in a calm voice. Marcus laughed even harder. "Sniper training? You can barely see over the counter at a coffee shop. How are you going to handle a rifle that weighs more than your backpack?" Before Sophia could answer, Sergeant Williams walked into the room. He was a tough-looking man in his 50s with gray hair and scars on his hands. His voice was loud and commanding. "Listen up, recruits. Welcome to the most difficult training program in the military. Most of you will fail. Some of you will quit. Only a few will become real snipers." He looked around the room, his eyes stopping on each recruit for a moment. When he saw Sophia, his expression didn't change, but she could tell he was surprised. Sniper training is not about how big you are or how loud you can shout. It's about patience, focus, and precision. If you think this is going to be easy, you're wrong. The sergeant continued, "For the next 12 weeks, you will wake up at 5 in the morning. You will run 10 miles every day. You will learn to shoot targets from distances you never imagined. You will study wind patterns, weather conditions, and enemy movements. Most importantly, you will learn to wait for hours without moving, sometimes in uncomfortable positions, until you get the perfect shot." After the introduction, the recruits were given their schedules and room assignments. Sophia found out she would be sharing a room with 3 other people. When she walked into her room, she met her roommates: Jake, a quiet guy from Texas who grew up hunting with his father; Tommy, a former police officer who wanted to serve his country; and, unfortunately, Marcus, who rolled his eyes when he saw her. "Great," Marcus said, throwing his bag on his bed. "I have to live with G.I. Jane here. This is going to be a long 12 weeks. Jake looked at Sophia and gave her a small smile. "Don't listen to him. My grandmother was a better shot than most men in my town. Size doesn't matter when you're behind a rifle." Sophia appreciated Jake's kindness, but she knew she would have to prove herself through actions, not words. That evening, she lay in her bed listening to Marcus snore loudly while she thought about the challenges ahead. The next morning, the alarm rang at exactly 5 o'clock. Sophia jumped out of bed and quickly put on her training uniform. She was ready before anyone else, which surprised Marcus. "Try to show off already?" he asked. The first week was brutal. Every morning started with a 10-mile run around the base. Sophia's legs felt like they were on fire, and her lungs burned with every breath. The other recruits were faster and stronger, and she often finished last. But she never gave up. While others complained about the distance, Sophia focused on finishing the run, no matter how long it took. During weapons training, things got even worse for Sophia. The rifle was heavy and awkward in her small hands. When she tried to hold it steady, her arms shook from the weight. The first time she fired the weapon, the recoil knocked her backward, and she almost fell down. Marcus and several other recruits burst out laughing. "Maybe you should try a water gun instead," Marcus said loudly, making sure everyone could hear him. Sergeant Williams watched everything, but said nothing. He had seen many recruits come and go, and he knew that the first few weeks separated the serious candidates from those who were just wasting everyone's time. Sophia's shooting scores were terrible. While other recruits hit targets at 200 yards, she struggled to hit anything beyond 100 yards. Her groupings were scattered all over the target, and sometimes she missed the target completely. After each shooting session, she felt more discouraged. One evening, after a particularly bad day at the shooting range, Sophia sat alone in the cafeteria. Her food was getting cold because she wasn't hungry. She was thinking about quitting. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Tommy sat down across from her. He had been watching her struggle and could see the frustration on her face. "You know," he said, "when I first started as a police officer, I was the worst shot in my class. My trainer told me I couldn't hit the side of a barn if I was standing inside it." Sophia looked up at him. "What changed?" "I realized I was trying to shoot like everyone else instead of finding my own way." "You're small, but that might actually be an advantage. You don't need as much space to hide, and you might be more stable in tight positions. Stop trying to copy the big guys and start figuring out what works for you." That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what Tommy had said. The next morning, instead of going to breakfast, she went to the shooting range early. She asked the range instructor if she could practice before the official training started. "Sure, but you only have 30 minutes before the others get here," the instructor said. Sophia spent those 30 minutes trying different positions and grips. She discovered that when she lay flat on her stomach with a rifle resting on a small sandbag, she felt more stable. The weight of the gun didn't bother her as much when it was supported properly. She also noticed that she was trying to rush her shots. Instead of taking her time to breathe and focus, she was pulling the trigger quickly because she felt pressured by the other recruits watching her. This morning, with no one around, she took her time with each shot. When the other recruits arrived for training, Sophia was still practicing. Sergeant Williams noticed that her target had several holes closer to the center than usual. "Better," he said simply, then walked away. It wasn't much, but it was the first positive comment Sophia had received since arriving at the base. Over the next few days, Sophia continued to wake up early and practice alone. She studied books about shooting techniques in her free time, while other recruits watched television or played cards. She learned about breathing control, trigger discipline, and how wind could affect a bullet's path. Slowly, her scores began to improve. She was still behind most of the other recruits, but she was no longer the worst shooter in the class. More importantly, she was gaining confidence in her abilities. Marcus noticed her improvement and didn't like it. He had enjoyed making fun of her, and now she was making him look bad. During one training session, he deliberately bumped into her while she was preparing to shoot, causing her to lose her focus. "Oops, sorry," he said with a fake smile. "Didn't see you there." Sophia knew it was intentional, but she didn't react. She simply reset her position and took her shot. The bullet hit close to the center of the target, her best shot yet. "Lucky shot," Marcus muttered. Jake witnessed the whole thing and was impressed by how Sophia handled the situation. "You're getting good at this," he told her later. Marcus is starting to get worried. As the weeks passed, Sophia's reputation began to change. She was no longer just a small girl who didn't belong. She was becoming known as someone who worked harder than anyone else and never gave up, no matter how difficult things became. The training became more advanced. Recruits learned to shoot from different positions, at moving targets, and in various weather conditions. They studied camouflage techniques and learned to remain hidden for hours at a time. Sophia found that her smaller size was actually helpful for these exercises. She could hide in places where the larger recruits couldn't fit. She could remain motionless for longer periods without getting uncomfortable. Her natural patience, something that had always been part of her personality, was perfect for sniper work. But the biggest test was still coming. In 2 weeks, there would be a final evaluation that would determine who would graduate from the program and who would be sent to regular infantry training. Sophia knew that this evaluation would be the most important moment of her military career. Everything she had worked for depended on her performance during those crucial hours. As she cleaned her rifle that evening, preparing for another early morning practice session, she thought about how far she had come. The girl who had been laughed at on the first day was now one of the more dedicated recruits in the program. But dedication alone might not be enough. The final test would require her to demonstrate everything she had learned under the most challenging conditions possible. Sophia took a deep breath and continued cleaning her weapon. Tomorrow would bring another day of training, another opportunity to improve, and another step closer to proving that sometimes the most unlikely person can succeed where others fail. The morning of the final evaluation arrived with heavy rain clouds covering the sky. Sophia woke up before her alarm, as had become her habit over the past few weeks. Her stomach felt nervous, but her mind was focused. Today would determine if all her hard work and dedication meant anything. She looked over at Marcus, who was still sleeping soundly. Over the weeks, his attitude toward her had shifted from mockery to grudging respect, though he still made occasional comments. Jake gave her an encouraging nod as they got dressed in their gear. "Today's the day," Jake whispered. "You ready for this?" Sophia nodded, checking her equipment one final time. Her rifle was clean and properly calibrated. Her gear was organized exactly the way she had practiced. Most importantly, her mind was calm and prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. At breakfast, Sergeant Williams addressed the remaining recruits. Out of the original 32 people who had started the program, only 18 remained. The others had either quit or been removed for failing to meet the minimum standards. Today you will face the most comprehensive test of everything you've learned, the sergeant announced. This evaluation will take place over 8 hours and will test your shooting accuracy, camouflage skills, physical endurance, and decision-making abilities under pressure. He paused and looked at each recruit carefully. The scenario is realistic. You are part of a reconnaissance mission in enemy territory. You must reach designated observation points, gather intelligence, and eliminate specific targets without being detected. You will be graded not just on your shooting, but on your ability to remain hidden and make smart tactical decisions. The recruits were divided into groups of 3 and assigned different routes through the training area, which covered several square miles of forest, hills, and simulated urban environments. Sophia found herself grouped with Jake and a recruit named David, a former Marine who had joined the program after his previous unit was disbanded. David had always been polite to Sophia, but she could tell he had doubts about her abilities. "Listen," he said as they prepared their equipment, "I know you've improved a lot, but this is different from range practice. We need to work as a team, and I need to know you can handle the pressure." Sophia understood his concern. "I won't let the team down," she said simply. Their mission began at dawn. They had to travel 3 miles through dense forest, reach an observation point overlooking a simulated enemy camp, gather information about guard rotations and weapon positions, and then eliminate 3 specific targets from a distance of 400 yards. The first challenge was moving through the forest without being detected by the instructors who were acting as enemy scouts. The 3 recruits had to use all their camouflage training to blend into the environment and avoid the patrol routes. Sophia's smaller size proved to be a significant advantage during this phase. While Jake and David had to carefully navigate around thick bushes and low-hanging branches, she could move through spaces they couldn't access. More than once, she found alternative routes that allowed the team to avoid potential detection. After 2 hours of careful movement, they reached their observation point. It was a rocky outcrop that provided an excellent view of the simulated enemy camp below. Using binoculars, they began gathering the required intelligence information. "Guard change happens every 30 minutes, David whispered, making notes on a small pad. "I count 12 enemy positions, with at least 20 personnel visible." Jake was studying the layout through a scope. "Target buildings are clearly marked. We should have clear shots from this position." Sophia was also observing, but she noticed something the others had missed. "Look at the wind flags down there," she said quietly. "The wind is shifting directions every few minutes. It's going to affect our shots differently depending on when we fire." David looked through his binoculars again and saw that she was right. The flag showed wind patterns that were constantly changing. This would make accurate shooting much more difficult than they had expected. Good catch, he admitted. We'll need to time our shots carefully. After gathering all the required intelligence, they prepared for the shooting portion of the test. Each recruit had to successfully eliminate one target. The targets were human-shaped silhouettes placed at various positions around the camp, each exactly 400 yards from their position. David went first. He was an experienced shooter and had consistently scored well throughout the program. He took his time, waited for a moment when the wind seemed stable, and fired. His shot hit the target cleanly. Jake was next. He had improved significantly since the beginning of the program and was now one of the better shooters in their class. He also waited for the right moment and successfully hit his target. Now it was Sophia's turn. She could feel both teammates watching her carefully. This was the moment that would prove whether she truly belonged in the program or if her improvements had just been lucky accidents. She settled into her shooting position, the same stance she had practiced hundreds of times during her early morning sessions. The rifle felt familiar and comfortable in her hands now, very different from those first awkward days when she could barely hold it steady. Through her scope, she could see her target clearly, but she also watched the wind flags, waiting for the right moment. The wind was tricky, shifting between different directions and speeds. Most shooters would have taken the first opportunity that seemed reasonable. But Sophia had learned patience. She had spent countless hours lying motionless during training exercises, waiting for the perfect moment. She understood that sometimes the best action is no action until conditions are exactly right. She waited for 3 full minutes, controlling her breathing and maintaining her position while the wind patterns changed around her. Jake and David began to get nervous, wondering if she was hesitating because of fear. Then, for just a few seconds, the wind flags showed a consistent pattern. The conditions were as close to perfect as they were likely to get. Sophia took a deep breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew through the air in a perfect arc and struck the target directly in the center. It was the most accurate shot of the day by any of the 3 teammates. David stared at her in amazement. That was incredible. How did you know to wait that long? The wind wasn't right before, Sophia explained. I learned to be patient. Jake smiled broadly. That's why she gets up every morning to practice while we're still sleeping. She pays attention to details we miss. Their mission wasn't over yet. They still had to return to base without being detected, a journey that would test their endurance and stealth skills one more time. The return trip was even more challenging because the instructors knew approximately when and where to expect them. As they made their way back through the forest, they encountered several close calls with patrol units. At one point, they had to remain completely motionless for 20 minutes while an instructor walked within 10 feet of their hiding position. Sophia's small size helped the team once again. When they needed to hide under a fallen log, she fit easily while Jake and David had to contort themselves uncomfortably. When they had to cross an open area by crawling through tall grass, she could stay completely hidden while the larger men had to be extremely careful not to create visible movement. During the final mile of their return journey, they faced their biggest challenge. A patrol unit was moving directly toward them, and there was no obvious place to hide. The area was mostly open ground with only scattered rocks and small bushes. David looked around frantically. We're going to be spotted for sure, he whispered. But Sophia had already identified their best option. There, she pointed to a small depression in the ground near some rocks. If we lie flat and use our camouflage properly, we might blend in with the shadows. It was risky, but they had no other choice. The 3 recruits quickly moved to the position and arranged themselves to look like natural features of the landscape. Sophia helped position David and Jake to minimize their visibility. The patrol unit approached their hiding spot and stopped less than 5 yards away. One of the instructors was looking directly at their position through binoculars. Sophia could hear her heart beating loudly, but she forced herself to remain absolutely still. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 2 minutes, the patrol moved on. They had successfully avoided detection. When they finally reached the base and reported to Sergeant Williams, all three were exhausted but proud of their performance. The sergeant reviewed their mission report and nodded approvingly. "Good work, all of you. Complete intelligence gathering, successful target elimination, and no detection incidents. That's the kind of performance we expect from qualified snipers." As they walked back to their barracks, David pulled Sophia aside. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I had serious doubts about whether you belonged in this program. Today you proved that you're not just good enough to be here. You're one of the best." That evening, the results of all the evaluation missions were announced. Out of the 18 recruits who had started the final test, only 12 had passed all the requirements. Sophia was one of them, and her scores were among the highest in the group. Marcus, who had been placed in a different team, had failed the stealth portion of his mission and would not be graduating from the program. As he packed his belongings, he stopped by Sophia's bunk. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "You earned this more than most of us. Good luck out there." It wasn't exactly a warm friendship, but it was an acknowledgement that she had proven herself through performance rather than words. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for the following week, but Sophia already felt like she had accomplished something significant. She had started as the person everyone expected to fail, and now she was one of the elite few who would become military snipers. But even as she celebrated this achievement, she knew that graduating from training was just the beginning. Soon she would face real missions with real consequences, where the skills she had learned would be tested in ways that no training exercise could fully simulate. As she lay in her bunk that night, Sophia thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. Every morning of extra practice, every moment of doubt she had overcome, every small improvement she had made had contributed to this success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she allowed herself to feel proud of how far she had come. The doubters had been wrong, and she had proved it through dedication, skill, and an unwavering refusal to give up when things became difficult. 6 months after graduation, Sophia found herself deployed to a remote military base in a mountainous region where tensions between hostile forces had been escalating for weeks. She had completed several successful missions since finishing sniper training, but nothing had prepared her for the assignment she was about to receive. The base was small and surrounded by rocky hills that provided excellent defensive positions, but also created numerous blind spots where enemy forces could approach undetected. Sophia had quickly earned respect among her new unit for her exceptional shooting skills and her ability to remain hidden in positions where larger soldiers couldn't operate effectively. Her commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, was a veteran with 15 years of combat experience. Unlike the instructors during training, he had no preconceptions about Sophia's abilities. He had read her service record and seen her performance in previous operations. To him, she was simply another skilled sniper who happened to be smaller than most. On a Tuesday morning that started like any other, Captain Reynolds called Sophia into his office for a briefing. The room was sparse, containing only a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a large map of the surrounding area mounted on the wall. "Martinez, we have a situation," the captain began, pointing to a location on the map about 3 miles from their base. "Intelligence reports indicate that a group of enemy fighters has taken control of a strategic observation post on Hill 247. From that position, they can monitor all our supply routes and coordinate attacks on our convoys." Sophia studied the map carefully. Hill 247 was the highest point in the immediate area, offering commanding views in all directions. If enemy forces control that position, they could indeed cause serious problems for base operations. "What's the mission, sir?" she asked. Captain Reynolds moved his finger to mark several positions around the hill. "We've tried conventional approaches, but the terrain makes it impossible to assault directly without significant casualties. The enemy has established defensive positions with clear sight lines on all the obvious approach routes." He paused and looked directly at Sophia. "However, our reconnaissance team has identified a possible infiltration route. It's extremely difficult, and would require someone small enough to navigate through a series of narrow rock formations. Once in position, a single sniper might be able to neutralize the enemy spotters and disrupt their operations long enough for our forces to advance. Sophia understood immediately why she had been chosen for this mission. Her size, which had once been seen as a disadvantage, was now exactly what was needed to accomplish something that larger soldiers couldn't attempt. "When do I deploy?" she asked. "Tomorrow at dawn. You'll be working alone on this one. The terrain won't allow for a spotter, and any additional personnel would increase the risk of detection. You'll have to navigate to the position, assess the situation, and make tactical decisions independently." That evening, Sophia spent several hours studying detailed photographs of the target area and memorizing the route she would need to follow. The path required her to climb through a series of narrow canyons and rock formations that would provide concealment, but also present significant physical challenges. Her equipment had to be carefully selected for the mission. She would be carrying everything she needed for potentially 2 days of operation, including her rifle, ammunition, food, water, camouflage materials, and communication equipment. Every item had to be essential because excess weight would make the difficult climb even more dangerous. She chose her most reliable rifle, the same weapon she had used during training. Over the months since graduation, they had become perfectly matched, and she knew exactly how it would perform under different conditions. She packed extra ammunition, even though she hoped to accomplish the mission with just a few well-placed shots. Before dawn, Sophia made her final preparations. She applied camouflage paint to her face and hands, attached natural vegetation to her gear to break up her outline, and double-checked all her equipment. As she prepared to leave the base, several fellow soldiers wished her good luck. Jake, who had been assigned to the same unit after their training, pulled her aside. "Be careful out there. This is different from anything we practiced. You're going to be completely on your own." Sophia nodded. "I know, but this is what we trained for. I'll be back." The first part of her journey took her across relatively open ground in the early morning darkness. She moved carefully, using available cover and staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the lightening sky. Her small size allowed her to use concealment that wouldn't have been effective for larger soldiers. As the sun rose, she reached the beginning of the rock formations that would provide her route to the target area. What she saw confirmed that the mission would be every bit as challenging as expected. The rocks created a maze of narrow passages, some barely wide enough for her to squeeze through while carrying her equipment. She began the climb methodically, testing each handhold and footstep before committing her weight. A fall in this terrain could result in serious injury, and there would be no immediate help available. Her physical training over the past months had prepared her for this kind of exertion, but the combination of carrying heavy equipment and navigating difficult terrain was exhausting. After 3 hours of climbing, she reached a position where she could observe the enemy-held hilltop through her scope. What she saw was concerning. The enemy had positioned at least 6 fighters in well-concealed defensive positions. They had clear sight lines covering all the approaches that conventional forces would use. More troubling was the discovery of a heavy machine gun position that hadn't been mentioned in the intelligence briefing. This weapon could cause devastating casualties to any unit attempting to advance across the open ground around the hill. Sophia realized that her mission had just become more complex than expected. Simply eliminating the spotters wouldn't be sufficient if the machine gun remained operational. She would need to neutralize multiple targets in a coordinated sequence to give friendly forces a real opportunity to advance. She spent the next hour studying the enemy positions and planning her approach. The targets were spread across the hilltop, and she would need to move between different firing positions to engage them effectively. This meant exposing herself to potential counterattack after her first shot revealed her location. Using her radio, she contacted Captain Reynolds to report her observations. "Base, this is Martinez. I have visual on the target area. Enemy strength is higher than expected, and they have a heavy machine gun that wasn't in the briefing. The captain's voice crackled through the radio. Understood, Martinez. What's your assessment? Sir, I can neutralize the targets, but it will require engaging from multiple positions. I'll need to move quickly after the first shot to avoid return fire. Do you need us to abort the mission and send additional support? Sophia considered this option carefully. Additional troops might increase their chances of success, but they would also face the same terrain challenges she had overcome. By the time reinforcements could reach her position, the enemy would likely have reinforced their own defenses. Negative, sir. I can handle this, but I'll need our forces ready to advance immediately after I engage. The window of opportunity will be brief. Roger that. We'll be standing by for your signal. Sophia moved to her first firing position, a concealed spot among the rocks that provided a clear view of the enemy machine gun. This would be her primary target because it posed the greatest threat to friendly forces. Eliminating it first would give their advance the best chance of success. She settled into her shooting position and began the careful process of preparing for the shot. The range was approximately 350 yards, well within her capabilities, but the target was partially concealed behind sandbags. She would need to wait for the machine gunner to expose himself sufficiently for a clean shot. The wind conditions were variable, typical of mountainous terrain. She observed the movement of dust and vegetation to gauge wind patterns and adjust her aim accordingly. This was exactly the kind of patient observation that had become her specialty during training. After waiting for 12 minutes, the machine gunner shifted his position to scan a different sector of the valley below. For just a few seconds, his head and shoulders were clearly visible above the protective barrier. Sophia took her shot. The bullet struck precisely where she had aimed, instantly neutralizing the machine gun threat. Immediately, she heard shouts from other enemy positions as they tried to locate the source of the gunfire. She quickly moved to her second firing position, about 40 yards from the first. This movement had been planned and practiced, allowing her to relocate while remaining concealed among the rock formations. From her new position, she had a clear view of two enemy spotters who were scanning the area where they thought her first shot had originated. They were looking in the wrong direction, giving her another opportunity for precise shooting. Her second shot eliminated one of the spotters. Before his companion could react, she fired again, successfully neutralizing the second target as well. Now the remaining enemy forces knew approximately where she was located and began firing in her direction. Bullets struck the rocks around her position, sending sharp fragments flying through the air. She pressed herself against the stone wall and waited for the immediate barrage to subside. Using her radio, she contacted the base. Base, machine gun, and 2 spotters eliminated. Recommend immediate advance while remaining targets are focused on my position. Roger, Martinez. Forces are moving now. Hold your position and continue to engage targets of opportunity. Sophia moved to her third planned firing position, but as she approached it, she realized that enemy gunfire had made it untenable. Bullets were striking the rocks where she needed to position herself. She would have to improvise. Scanning the area, she identified an alternative position that hadn't been part of her original plan. It required a difficult climb across exposed rock face, but it would give her an unexpected angle on the remaining enemy positions. She made the dangerous crossing quickly, knowing that speed was more important than stealth at this point. The enemy fighters were focused on her previous positions and didn't notice her movement until she was already established in the new location. From this position, she could see 3 more enemy fighters who were directing fire toward her previous locations. They had no idea she was now behind and above them. Taking careful aim, she eliminated all 3 with rapid, precise shots. The hilltop fell silent. Through her scope, she could see friendly forces advancing across the valley below, taking advantage of the confusion and reduced enemy resistance. Her mission had been successful, but she knew she wasn't safe yet. As she prepared to return to base, movement in a previously unseen position caught her attention. An enemy fighter had remained hidden during her entire engagement and was now preparing to fire at the advancing friendly forces with a rocket-propelled grenade. This target hadn't been part of her original mission, but she could see that he was about to cause casualties among her fellow soldiers. The range was extreme, nearly 450 yards, and the shot angle was difficult. It would be the most challenging shot she had ever attempted under combat conditions. She adjusted her position slightly and calculated the trajectory needed for the long-range shot. The wind was variable, and she would have only one opportunity before the enemy fighter could complete his attack on friendly forces. Taking the deepest breath of her life, Sophia aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger. The bullet traveled the entire distance in less than a second and struck the enemy fighter just as he was preparing to fire. The threat to friendly forces was eliminated, and the advance could continue safely. As she finally began her return journey to base, Sophia reflected on what had just occurred. Her single mission had eliminated 7 enemy fighters, neutralized a strategic position, and prevented casualties among friendly forces. The doubters from her training days could never have imagined that the smallest recruit in their class would one day accomplish something of this magnitude. When she reached the base several hours later, Captain Reynolds and her fellow soldiers were waiting to welcome her back. The success of the mission had exceeded all expectations, and word of her performance was already spreading throughout the unit. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Captain Reynolds said. "Your actions today saved lives and accomplished an objective that conventional forces couldn't have achieved." Jake greeted her with a huge smile. "I heard about what you did up there. That final shot was over 400 yards? That's incredible even by your standards." That evening, as Sophia cleaned her rifle and wrote her mission report, she thought about how far she had traveled from those first days of training when everyone doubted her abilities. She had proven that determination, skill, and patience could overcome any initial disadvantages. But more importantly, she had demonstrated that success comes not from fitting into other people's expectations, but from developing your own unique strengths and applying them when they matter most. The precision shot that saved her fellow soldiers' lives had indeed changed everything, not just for the mission, but for how everyone saw the power of perseverance and dedication. Sometimes the most unlikely person becomes exactly the right person when the moment demands it.